Jake Martinez wiped the grease from his hands as he stared at the massive metallic creature chained to the asteroid's surface. The thing was enormous, easily the size of a small space station, with scales that shimmered like liquid mercury in the dim light of the distant star. What caught his attention wasn't just its size, but the way it moved with such careful, deliberate motions despite being bound by chains that looked like they could anchor a battleship. "That's your new project," Captain Chen said, floating beside him in the low-gravity environment. "Some kind of alien artifact the salvage team found drifting in dead space. Been here for who knows how long." Jake pushed off from the maintenance platform and drifted closer to the creature. As he approached, massive eyes opened and fixed on him. They weren't the cold mechanical sensors he expected from some ancient machine. These eyes held intelligence, pain, and something that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The creature was alive. "It's not an artifact," Jake said quietly. "It's a living being." Chen shrugged, his magnetic boots clanking against the metal grating as he walked along the platform. "Living, dead, doesn't matter." The eggheads ran every scan they could think of. The thing's been completely drained of power. No energy signatures, no bioelectrical activity, nothing. It's basically a very expensive paperweight now. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Chen was wrong. He'd spent 15 years fixing everything from cargo haulers to military dreadnoughts, and he'd developed an instinct for understanding how things worked. This creature radiated a sense of dormant potential, like a fusion reactor in standby mode. "What did the chains do?" Jake asked, examining the massive restraints that wrapped around the creature's limbs and neck. "Dampening field generators," Chen replied. "Military grade. They're suppressing any residual energy the thing might have left. The science team was worried it might have some kind of passive defense system." Jake ran his hand along one of the creature's scales. The metal was warm to the touch despite the cold vacuum of space around them. As his palm made contact, he could have sworn he felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat so slow it was barely perceptible. "How long has it been here?" he asked. "The carbon dating on the restraint suggests about 2,000 years, give or take a century. Whatever civilization put it here is long gone. 2,000 years. Jake tried to imagine being trapped and helpless for that long. The thought made him nauseous. He'd spent 3 days trapped in a damaged shuttle once, and that had nearly driven him insane. This creature had endured millennia of imprisonment. "What do you want me to do with it?" Chen pulled out a data pad and handed it to Jake. "The company wants you to figure out how it works. If there's any salvageable technology, they want it extracted and cataloged. If not, they'll probably sell it to a collector or museum." Jake scrolled through the preliminary reports on the datapad. The creature's biology was unlike anything in the known databases. Its scales were composed of some kind of self-repairing metallic alloy that the science team couldn't identify. Its internal structure suggested it was once capable of generating enormous amounts of energy, but the specific mechanisms were unclear. "I'll need full access," Jake said. "No restrictions on my tools or methods, whatever you need. Just remember, this thing is worth more than both our salaries combined. Don't break it." After Chen left, Jake spent the next several hours just observing. He watched the way the creature breathed, slow and steady despite having been essentially comatose for 2 millennia. He studied the intricate patterns on its scales, noting how they seemed to follow some kind of mathematical sequence. Most importantly, he watched its eyes. The creature was aware. It tracked his movements, blinked when he waved at it, and even seemed to show signs of curiosity when he began setting up his equipment. Jake had worked on plenty of AI systems, but this was different. "This was genuine consciousness. Can you understand me?" Jake asked, feeling slightly foolish for talking to what everyone else considered a piece of salvage. The creature's massive head turned slightly, bringing one enormous eye into direct alignment with Jake's position. Then impossibly it nodded. Jake's hand shook as he activated his scanning equipment. The creature wasn't just alive, it was intelligent and trying to communicate. This changed everything. He spent the rest of his shift running detailed scans, focusing on the areas where the dampening chains made contact with the creature's body. The energy suppression field was incredibly sophisticated, far beyond anything human technology could produce. But Jake had always been good at reverse engineering things he didn't understand. As he worked, the creature watched him with what could only be described as hope. Jake found himself talking to it, explaining what he was doing and what he hoped to accomplish. The creature seemed to understand, responding with subtle movements and expressions that made Jake increasingly certain that this was no mere animal. "The energy patterns in your scales suggest You were once capable of generating massive amounts of power, Jake said, reviewing his scan results. But these chains aren't just suppressing your energy output. They're actually draining your core reserves and preventing regeneration. The creature's eyes narrowed, and Jake could have sworn he saw anger flash across its reptilian features. Someone did this to you deliberately, Jake continued. This isn't just imprisonment. It's torture. As the work shift ended and Jake prepared to return to the station, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He wasn't just going to study this creature. He was going to free it. I don't know who you are or what you did to deserve this, he said quietly. But 2,000 years is long enough. I'm going to get you out of here. For the first time since Jake had arrived, the creature's eyes showed something other than pain and resignation. They showed trust. Jake returned to the salvage station with his mind racing. He'd worked on thousands of machines, but never had one communicated with him so clearly without saying a word. The creature's intelligence was undeniable, and that made its imprisonment all the more horrifying. He locked himself in his workshop and began analyzing the scan data. The energy-dampening chains were masterworks of engineering, but they had one critical flaw. They'd been designed to contain something specific. The suppression field was calibrated to target particular energy frequencies, which meant Jake could potentially find workarounds. Computer, run a spectral analysis on the dampening field harmonics, he commanded. The workshop's AI processed the data for several minutes before responding. Analysis complete. The suppression field targets quantum resonance frequencies consistent with stellar-class energy generation. The field also shows evidence of biological neural pathway interference. Stellar-class energy generation. Jake whistled low. That meant the creature could potentially produce energy equivalent to a small star. No wonder someone had gone to such lengths to contain it. His research was interrupted by a soft chime from his door. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's xenobiologist, stood in the corridor holding a steaming cup of coffee. Mind if I come in? I heard you volunteered for the Big Lizard project. Jake waved her inside. Sarah was one of the few people on the station who shared his belief that not everything unknown was automatically dangerous. It's not just a lizard, Jake said, pulling up his scan results. Look at these neural pathway readings. Sarah set down her coffee and leaned over his shoulder to examine the data. These complexity levels are off the charts. The neural density in the cranial region is higher than anything in our databases. That's not even the interesting part, Jake said, highlighting another section of the scan. Look at these energy channels running through its body. They're not just biological, they're engineered. Engineered how? The creature was built as much as it was born. Someone took a naturally occurring life form and enhanced it with technology that makes our best fusion reactors look like campfires. Sarah frowned at the data. But why would someone create something like this and then imprison it? I don't think the same people did both, Jake replied. The technology in the creature is completely different from the technology in the restraints. Different materials, different energy signatures, different everything. Jake spent the next 3 days diving deeper into the mystery. He requisitioned every piece of historical data the station's computers could access, searching for any reference to creatures matching his subject's description. Most of the galactic databases were frustratingly incomplete, but he eventually found something in the archives of an ancient trading post. The entry was brief and written in a language that required computer translation, but it made Jake's blood run cold. The Star Drakes serve the Ancient Ones with fire and fury. Their power is beyond measure, their loyalty absolute. May the gods protect us if they ever turn their rage upon the innocent. Star Drakes. Jake had found references to them in a dozen different cultures, always described as beings of immense power who served some mysterious master race. The descriptions varied, but they all shared common elements. Massive reptilian creatures capable of generating stellar-level energy and traveling between star systems under their own power. But if his creature was a Star Drake, who were the Ancient Ones? And why had someone imprisoned their servant? Jake returned to the asteroid with new equipment and a growing sense of urgency. The creature watched him approach with what he was beginning to recognize as anticipation. I know what you are now, Jake said as he began setting up a quantum resonance scanner. You're a Star Drake, but I still don't understand who did this to you or why. The creature's eyes widened slightly and it made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the asteroid's structure. Jake took it as confirmation. The energy patterns in these chains are fascinating, Jake continued, running his scanner over the restraints. Whoever built them understood your physiology perfectly. They knew exactly which frequencies to suppress to keep you from accessing your power. As Jake worked, he began to notice something odd. The restraints weren't just suppressing the creature's energy, they were redirecting it. Microscopic conduits in the chain links were siphoning off tiny amounts of power and channeling them into a central collection node. Someone's been stealing your energy for 2,000 years, Jake said, his voice filled with disgust. These chains aren't just keeping you prisoner. They're slowly draining your life force. The creature's expression darkened, and Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold vacuum around them. For just a moment, he glimpsed the fury that lay dormant beneath centuries of forced helplessness. Jake traced the energy conduits to their source and found something that made his stomach drop. The collection node wasn't just storing the stolen energy, it was transmitting it. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone was still receiving regular shipments of Stardrake power. They're still out there, Jake whispered. Whoever did this to you, they're still alive and they're still using your stolen power. The creature fixed Jake with a stare so intense that he felt like it was looking directly into his soul. Then, slowly and deliberately, it nodded toward the central restraint around its neck. Jake examined the collar more closely and discovered something that changed everything. Hidden beneath layers of energy shielding was a data storage device containing what appeared to be the creature's memories from before its imprisonment. You want me to see what happened? Jake said. Another nod. Jake connected his portable data reader to the memory core and activated the playback function. Immediately, his vision was filled with images of a vast empire ruled by beings of incredible beauty and terrifying power. He saw fleets of crystal ships that moved between stars like thought made manifest. He witnessed worlds transformed at will and entire species reshaped to serve the whims of their masters. And he saw his Stardrake, not as a prisoner but as a willing guardian, protecting the innocent from the very empire he'd just witnessed. The memory showed the creature's final battle against its former masters, a conflict that had raged across multiple star systems and cost millions of lives. The Stardrake had turned against the empire it once served, choosing to protect the weak rather than enable the strong. As punishment, the empire's Empress had personally overseen the creature's capture and imprisonment. But Jake saw something in those final memories that gave him hope. The Empress had aged during the battle. Whatever these beings were, they weren't immortal. 2,000 years, Jake said softly. She might still be alive, but she won't be at full strength anymore. The creature's eyes blazed with an inner fire that the chains couldn't completely suppress. It was ready for revenge, and Jake was beginning to think he was ready to help provide it. Jake couldn't sleep. The Stardrake's memories played on repeat in his mind, showing him glimpses of an empire that had once controlled half the galaxy. The beings in those memories called themselves the Valorians, and their Empress was something that defied human understanding of biology and physics. He'd seen her in the creature's final memories, tall and ethereal, with skin that seemed to contain swirling galaxies and eyes that burned with the light of dying stars. She commanded power that could reshape reality itself. But what terrified Jake most was the casual cruelty she displayed when dealing with those who opposed her. Computer, search all databases for references to Valorian Empire, or Empress of the Void, Jake commanded from his workshop. Search complete. 17 references found across multiple historical databases. Warning: most sources categorize these references as mythology or folklore. Jake pulled up the results and felt his blood run cold. The references painted a picture of an empire that had conquered thousands of worlds before mysteriously vanishing from galactic history. Most accounts describe the Valorians as beautiful beyond description, but utterly without mercy. One account, from a species called the Keth Mori, was particularly detailed. The Starwalker Empress came to our world with promises of enlightenment and progress. She demanded only that we surrender our strongest warriors to serve as her guardians. When our elders refused, she turned our own champions against us. The Stardrakes that had once protected our cities became instruments of our destruction. In 3 days, our civilization was reduced to ash. Jake realized with growing horror that the Stardrake hadn't just been the Empress's prisoner. It had been her weapon. The creature had spent centuries conquering worlds in her name before finally rebelling against her rule. He returned to the asteroid with a new understanding of what he was dealing with. The Star Drake sensed his change in mood immediately, its massive eyes tracking his movements with what looked like concern. "I know what you used to do for her," Jake said quietly. "I've read the accounts. You destroyed entire civilizations on her command." The creature's expression filled with such profound sadness that Jake felt his anger fade. Whatever crimes it had committed, the weight of guilt was clearly unbearable. "But you stopped," Jake continued. "You chose to fight against her instead of for her. That has to count for something." The Star Drake made a low rumbling sound that somehow conveyed both agreement and regret. Jake connected his data reader to the memory core again, but this time he searched for specific information about the Empress herself. What he found made him question whether he was making a terrible mistake by considering freeing such a powerful creature. The Empress wasn't just ruler of the Valorian Empire. She was its heart and soul. Her power flowed through every ship, every weapon, every technology her people used. She could manipulate matter at the molecular level, traverse vast distances in seconds, and command forces that made human military might look like children playing with toys. But the memories also revealed something crucial. She needed external power sources to maintain her abilities. The Star Drakes weren't just her guardians. They were living batteries that fed her ever-growing hunger for energy. "That's why the chains are still transmitting power," Jake said with sudden understanding. "She's been feeding off you for 2,000 years. Every Star Drake she captured is keeping her alive and strong." The creature nodded grimly. Jake accessed deeper memory files and discovered something that changed everything. The Empress hadn't just imprisoned this one Star Drake. She had captured dozens of them. Across the galaxy, other creatures like his new friend were chained and suffering, their life force slowly being drained to fuel an ancient tyrant's continued existence. "How many others are there?" Jake asked. The Star Drake's response came not through nodding or expression, but through a direct interface with the memory core. Jake's vision filled with images of other Star Drakes, each one bound by similar restraints in different locations. He counted at least 30 before the images stopped. 37, Jake whispered. "She has 37 of you feeding her power." The implications were staggering. If Jake freed this one Star Drake, he would be declaring war on a being who commanded the power of nearly 40 stellar-class energy sources. The Empress might be ancient, but she was far from helpless. Jake spent the next several hours studying the memories of the Empress's capabilities, looking for any weakness he could exploit. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The Valorian Empire had fallen not because they were defeated in battle, but because they had simply vanished from known space. The memory suggested that the Empress had retreated to a hidden dimension or pocket reality, taking her remaining forces with her. She was still out there, still alive, but she was hiding. "She's afraid," Jake realized. Something made her run and hide. But what could possibly threaten someone with that much power? The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing the Star Drake's memories of its final battle, Jake noticed something odd in the background. Other creatures were fighting alongside the rebellious Star Drakes, beings he didn't recognize but who seemed familiar somehow. "Computer, analyze these visual patterns and compare them to known species databases." The analysis took several minutes, but when the results appeared, Jake's worldview shifted dramatically. Pattern match found. Visual characteristics consistent with early human evolutionary variants. Estimated temporal displacement 2,000 years. Humans, Jake breathed. There were humans fighting the Valorian Empire 2,000 years ago. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't always been confined to their small corner of the galaxy. 2,000 years ago, humans had been spacefaring warriors capable of standing against beings of godlike power. Jake dove deeper into the memories, searching for any reference to human involvement in the rebellion. What he found filled him with a mixture of pride and terror. Humans hadn't just participated in the rebellion. They had led it. A group of human warriors and engineers had somehow learned to resist Valorian mind control and had organized the other enslaved species into a coordinated uprising. The Star Drake's memories showed humans fighting with a combination of advanced technology and tactical brilliance that had caught the Valorians completely off guard. They used the Empire's own weapons against them, turned their Star Drake guardians into allies, and coordinated simultaneous uprisings across hundreds of worlds. But the cost had been enormous. The memories showed entire human fleets, sacrificing themselves to give other species time to escape. Jake saw human commanders making impossible choices, spending lives like currency to purchase freedom for beings they barely knew. "My species," Jake said quietly. "We did this before. We fought her before." The Stardrake's response was a complex mixture of gratitude, respect, and warning. The memories it shared showed that while humans had been instrumental in the rebellion's success, they had also been the Empress's primary target for revenge. When the uprising finally forced her to retreat, she had taken special care to ensure that humanity was scattered and weakened. The humans who fought her were either killed in battle or exiled to distant parts of the galaxy, where their descendants would forget their heritage. "She made sure we'd never threaten her again," Jake said. "That's why human history only goes back a few thousand years. She erased us from galactic history." But as Jake studied the memories more carefully, he began to see something the Empress had missed. Human adaptability and ingenuity weren't traits that could be permanently suppressed. Given enough time, humans would always find ways to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. "She underestimated us," Jake said with growing confidence. "She thought scattering us would make us weak, but it just made us harder to find and predict." The Stardrake made a sound that Jake was beginning to recognize as approval. For the first time since discovering the creature's true nature, Jake felt like he might actually have a chance of succeeding. But as he began planning his approach to breaking the restraints, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that freeing the Stardrake would set events in motion that would reshape the galaxy forever. Jake stared at the massive restraint system with new eyes. What had once looked like advanced alien technology now revealed itself as something far more sinister. A carefully designed torture device meant to slowly drain the life from one of the galaxy's most powerful beings. "All right, big guy," Jake said, patting one of the Stardrake's scales. "Let's see what we're working with." He'd spent 3 weeks analyzing the restraint system's construction, and what he'd found was both impressive and terrifying. The Valorians had built the chains using materials that didn't exist in normal space-time. The metal itself seemed to phase in and out of reality, making it nearly impossible to effect with conventional tools. But Jake had noticed something the Valorians hadn't accounted for. Human engineering wasn't conventional. HFY chains exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Jake explained to the Stardrake as he unpacked his modified equipment. "That's why they're so effective at containing your energy. But it's also why normal tools can't touch them." The Stardrake watched with intense interest as Jake assembled a device that looked like a cross between a welding torch and a particle accelerator. "This is a quantum phase disruptor," Jake continued. "I built it using principles from your own memories combined with human engineering techniques. If my calculations are correct, it should be able to destabilize the dimensional anchors keeping the chains in phase." Jake had reverse-engineered the device from memories of human rebels who had fought similar restraints 2,000 years ago. The original design had been crude but effective. Jake's version incorporated modern human technology with ancient knowledge to create something entirely new. He positioned the disruptor near the largest restraint around the star, Drake's chest, and activated the device. Immediately, the chain began to flicker between visible and invisible as its dimensional stability wavered. "It's working," Jake breathed. But then alarms began blaring throughout the asteroid facility. The chains weren't just restraints. They were monitoring devices that reported any tampering attempts back to their creator. "Jake." Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comm system. "What the hell are you doing out there? We're reading massive energy fluctuations from your position." Jake knew he had seconds before Chen arrived with security forces. He cranked the disruptor to maximum power and focused the beam on the chain's central locking mechanism. The Valorian metal shrieked as its dimensional bonds began to collapse. The Stardrake's eyes blazed with hope as the first restraint started to dissolve. Then everything went wrong. The failing restraint released a pulse of stored energy that overloaded Jake's disruptor. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, throwing Jake backward into the asteroid's rocky surface. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the Stardrake roar in frustration as the partially damaged chain reformed itself, using some kind of self-repair protocol. "Martinez," Chen's voice echoed through the cavern as he arrived with a full security team. "Step away from the artifact immediately." Jake groaned and struggled to his feet, his vision blurry from the impact. "Chen, you don't understand. This isn't an artifact. It's a prisoner of war." I understand that you just triggered every alarm on the station, Chen replied, gesturing for his team to surround Jake. What I don't understand is why you're risking everyone's lives to play with something we don't comprehend. Because I do comprehend it, Jake said, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. This creature fought against an empire that enslaved entire species. It chose to protect the innocent instead of serving tyrants, and it's been tortured for 2,000 years because of that choice. Chen's expression softened slightly, but his weapon remained trained on Jake. Even if that's true, you can't just start dismantling alien technology without authorization. The energy readings from your little experiment were off the charts. You could have destroyed the entire station. Jake looked back at the Stardrake, whose eyes reflected a mixture of disappointment and understanding. The creature knew that Jake had tried and failed, but it also seemed to appreciate the attempt. I need more time, Jake said, and better equipment. What you need is a psych evaluation, Chen replied. You're confined to quarters pending a full investigation. As the security team escorted Jake away, he caught one last glimpse of the Stardrake. The creature's expression had changed from disappointment to something that looked almost like amusement. It was as if the creature found Jake's defiance entertaining rather than tragic. Back in his quarters, Jake paced like a caged animal. His first attempt had failed, but he'd learned valuable information about the restraint system's defenses. The chains could repair themselves, but the process took time and energy. If he could damage multiple restraints simultaneously, he might be able to overwhelm the repair protocols. But he needed help, and there was only one person on the station who might be willing to provide it. Jake activated his personal communicator and sent a coded message to Dr. Sarah Kim. Within an hour, she appeared at his door with a medical scanner and a worried expression. Jake, what happened out there? The energy readings from the asteroid went completely insane. I tried to free it, Jake said simply, and I'm going to try again. Sarah set down her scanner and stared at him. Are you completely insane? Chen has you under guard. Security is monitoring everything you do. Then help me figure out a way around them. Jake spent the next hour showing Sarah everything he'd learned about the Stardrake and the Valorian Empire. He shared the creature's memories, explained the historical connection to humanity, and outlined his theory about the ongoing threat the Empress represented. This is incredible, Sarah said, scrolling through the data on Jake's personal tablet. If even half of this is true, we're looking at the most significant discovery in human history. It's all true, Jake said. And if I don't find a way to free that creature, it's going to spend the rest of eternity being slowly tortured by someone who sees entire species as disposable resources. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the technical specifications of Jake's failed disruptor. The problem with your approach is that you're trying to attack the restraints directly. But what if we approach this differently? What do you mean? The chains are designed to contain and drain energy from the Stardrake, but they're not designed to handle energy being fed back into the creature from an external source. Jake felt a spark of hope. You want to overload the system from the inside? Exactly. If we can find a way to channel massive amounts of power directly into the Stardrake's natural energy matrix, we might be able to cause a feedback loop that would destroy the restraints from within. It was a brilliant idea, but Jake could see several problems with the execution. We'd need access to the station's main reactor to generate that kind of power, and we'd have to do it without Chen or the security team noticing. Sarah smiled. Leave that to me. I have friends in the engineering department who owe me favors. Jake felt hope returning for the first time since his failed attempt. The plan was dangerous and complicated, but it might actually work. More importantly, it gave the Stardrake a real chance at freedom after 2 millennia of suffering. But as they began planning their approach, neither Jake nor Sarah realized that their activities had already attracted the attention of something far more dangerous than station security. Somewhere in the depths of space, ancient sensors had detected the energy signature of Jake's disruptor. The Empress knew that someone was trying to free her prisoner, and she was already taking steps to ensure that such an attempt would never succeed again. Sarah's plan required precise timing and nerves of steel. For 3 days, she'd been building relationships with key personnel in the station's engineering department, convincing them that she needed access to the main reactor for metabolic research on their mysterious alien specimen. Meanwhile, Jake had been using his confinement to design a power transfer system that could channel the reactor's output directly into the Star Drake's energy matrix. The calculations were staggering. They would need to feed the creature more power in 60 seconds than most space stations used in a year. The security rotation changes in 20 minutes, Sarah whispered to Jake through their improvised communication system. That gives us a 40-minute window before the next patrol checks the reactor room. Jake nodded, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The power transfer conduits are ready. Once I make physical contact with the Star Drake, you'll have exactly 3 minutes to bring the reactor to full output before the safety protocols kick in. And if this doesn't work, then we'll probably be vaporized by the feedback explosion, Jake said with dark humor. But at least we'll die knowing we tried to do the right thing. The escape from his quarters was surprisingly easy. Sarah had arranged for the security guard to be called away on a false medical emergency, giving Jake a clear path to the maintenance corridors. He moved through the station service tunnels like a ghost, using his intimate knowledge of the facility's layout to avoid detection. The Star Drake seemed to sense his approach long before he emerged from the asteroid's maintenance shaft. When Jake finally reached the containment area, the creature's eyes were already fixed on his location with an intensity that made his skin tingle. "This is either going to free you or kill us both," Jake said, connecting his power transfer cables to the creature's central chest scales. "I hope you're ready for this." The Star Drake's response was a low rumble that Jake felt in his bones. There was no fear in the creature's expression, only determination and trust. "Sarah, I'm in position," Jake said into his communicator. "Reactor coming online now. You should start seeing power flow in 30 seconds. Jake watched his instruments as the station's massive fusion reactor began channeling its output through his improvised conduits. The energy readings climbed steadily as more and more power flowed into the Star Drake's dormant systems. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The creature remained motionless, its massive form showing no signs of change. But then Jake noticed a subtle shift in the pattern of its scales. The metallic surface was beginning to emit a faint glow. "It's working," Jake breathed. "The creature's accepting the power transfer." But the Valorian restraints weren't passive. As the Star Drake's internal energy levels began to rise, the chains responded by increasing their suppression field strength. The battle between input and drain created a feedback loop that made the air itself crackle with static electricity. "Jake, the reactor temperature is spiking." Sarah's voice crackled through the communicator. "I don't know how much longer I can maintain this output level." "Just a little longer," Jake replied, watching his instruments with growing excitement. The creature's energy reserves are building faster than the chains can drain them. The Star Drake's eyes suddenly blazed with inner fire as its long dormant power systems began to reactivate. Jake could feel the heat radiating from its scales as energy coursed through neural pathways that hadn't been active for 2 millennia. Then, the creature moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight adjustment of its massive head, but for something that had been completely motionless for 2,000 years, any movement was miraculous. "That's it," Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. "Come on, big guy. Fight back." The Star Drake's response was immediate and overwhelming. Every scale on its body suddenly blazed with brilliant light as it roared with a sound that shook the entire asteroid. The creature's power output spiked beyond anything Jake's instruments could measure. The Valorian chains began to smoke and spark as they struggled to contain energy levels they'd never been designed to handle. The first restraint around the creature's left foreleg simply disintegrated, unable to maintain its dimensional coherence in the face of such massive power output. "Sarah, cut the reactor feed now," Jake shouted. "The creature's generating its own power." But even as he celebrated their success, Jake realized they had a much bigger problem. The Star Drake's reawakening was sending energy signatures across the galaxy that would be impossible to hide. Every sensor array within 100 light-years would detect the massive power surge. More importantly, the Empress would know exactly where to find them. The thought had barely crossed Jake's mind when space around the asteroid began to ripple with unnatural distortions. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist as something enormous forced its way through the dimensional barriers. "Jake, get out of there now." Sarah's voice was panicked. "We're reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Something's coming through hyperspace." Jake looked up to see the Star Drake staring at something beyond the asteroid's surface. The creature's expression had shifted from triumph to grim determination. It knew what was coming. A massive crystalline ship emerged from the spatial distortion, its surface reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The vessel was beautiful and terrible, like a living jewel that had been shaped by forces beyond human comprehension. "The Empress," Jake whispered. The Star Drake turned its blazing eyes toward Jake and made a series of complex vocalizations. Somehow Jake understood the meaning despite the alien language. The creature was telling him to run, but Jake had spent too much effort freeing the Star Drake to abandon it now. Instead, he began disconnecting the power transfer cables, trying to give the creature maximum mobility for whatever was about to happen. "I'm not leaving," Jake said firmly. "We're in this together." The Star Drake's expression showed both gratitude and exasperation. It made another vocalization, this one clearly intended as a command. "I don't care if you can handle her alone," Jake replied. "You've been fighting this battle for 2,000 years. Maybe it's time you had some backup." The crystalline ship moved with fluid grace toward the asteroid, its approach accompanied by waves of energy that made Jake's equipment malfunction. As it drew closer, Jake could see movement within the vessel's transparent hull. Tall, ethereal figures that seemed to be made of living starlight. "The Valorians," Jake breathed. "They're still alive." But the Star Drake's reaction to the approaching ship wasn't fear. It was rage. The creature's power output increased again as it prepared for battle, melting the remaining restraints with the sheer intensity of its energy field. "Sarah, you need to get the station to safety," Jake said into his communicator. "This is about to become a war zone." "What about you?" Jake looked at the Star Drake, whose eyes burned with the fury of stellar cores. The creature had spent 2 millennia planning for this moment, and Jake could see that it was ready to finish what it had started so long ago. "I'm staying with my friend," Jake said. "We have unfinished business with some old enemies." As the Valorian ship moved into attack position, Jake realized that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. The resumption of a war that had shaped the destiny of countless species. And somehow, a human mechanic was about to play a crucial role in determining its outcome. The Valorian ship opened fire without warning. Beams of crystalline energy lanced out toward the asteroid, each one capable of vaporizing a city block. But the Star Drake was no longer the helpless prisoner it had been moments before. With a roar that echoed across space itself, the creature unleashed its fury. Streams of stellar fire erupted from its throat, meeting the Valorian energy beams in a spectacular display of opposing forces. Where the attacks collided, space itself cracked and sparked with dimensional fractures. Jake watched in awe as the Star Drake fully emerged from the asteroid, its massive form now wreathed in energy that made nearby metals glow white-hot. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a space station, and every inch of its metallic hide blazed with contained stellar fire. "Incredible," Jake breathed. "No wonder they called you Star Drakes." But the Valorian ship was far from defenseless. As Jake watched, the crystalline vessel began to transform, its hull reshaping itself into something that looked more like a living creature than a spacecraft. Tentacles of living crystal emerged from its surface, each one crackling with energy that made reality bend around it. The Star Drake responded by launching itself directly at the enemy ship, moving through space with impossible grace for something so massive. The two titans collided in a shower of sparks and energy that lit up the entire system like a newborn star. Jake knew he should retreat to safety, but he couldn't tear himself away from the battle. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that this fight was about more than just personal vengeance. The outcome would determine whether the Valorian Empire remained hidden or emerged to reclaim its galactic dominion. His communicator crackled with Sarah's voice. "Jake, the station's sensor arrays are going crazy. The energy readings from your position are registering as a stellar event." "That's because we're witnessing the birth of a new star," Jake replied, watching the Star Drake breathe plasma hot enough to melt planets. "Or maybe the death of an old tyrant." The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The Star Drake fought with the fury of 20 centuries of imprisonment, while the Valorian ship responded with weapons that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Both combatants were powerful beyond human comprehension, but Jake began to notice that the tide was slowly turning in the Drake's favor. The creature had spent 2,000 years analyzing its captor's technology through the very chains that bound it. Every weapon the Valorians used, every tactical maneuver they attempted, the Star Drake had a counter for. It was like watching a master chess player defeat an opponent whose every move had been anticipated decades in advance. But then the Valorian ship did something unexpected. Instead of continuing the direct assault, it began to retreat toward the edge of the system. Jake thought for a moment that the Star Drake had won, but the creature's reaction told a different story. The Star Drake's roar shifted from fury to alarm as it pursued the fleeing vessel. Jake realized with growing horror that the Valorians weren't retreating. They were leading the Drake away from populated areas so they could use their most devastating weapons without restraint. They're going to destroy the entire system, Jake said into his communicator. Sarah, you need to evacuate the station immediately. What about you? Jake looked at his equipment and made a decision that surprised even him. I'm going after them. Jake, that's suicide. You're a human mechanic, not a spacefaring warrior. Maybe, Jake said, activating the emergency systems on his maintenance pod. But I have something they don't expect, the element of surprise. Jake's maintenance pod was designed for short-range asteroid work, but he'd made extensive modifications over the years. More importantly, he had access to technology that the Valorians had never encountered, purely human, engineering that operated on principles completely different from their reality-bending sciences. As he launched his tiny craft in pursuit of the battling titans, Jake activated every sensor and communication array he could access. If he was going to die in the next few minutes, he was at least going to make sure humanity learned something from his sacrifice. The pod's engines screamed as Jake pushed them far beyond their design limits. The two massive combatants were moving toward the system's outer edge, where they could unleash their full power without worrying about collateral damage. As Jake approached the battle zone, he realized that the Star Drake was beginning to show signs of fatigue. 2,000 years of imprisonment had taken their toll, and despite its incredible power, the creature wasn't operating at full capacity. The Valorian ship, meanwhile, was beginning to reveal its true nature. Jake watched in fascination and horror as the vessel continued to transform, becoming something that looked less like a machine and more like a living extension of the Empress herself. Through his sensors, Jake caught his first clear glimpse of the being he'd been fighting by proxy. The Empress stood at the center of the crystalline ship, her form radiating power that made nearby space ripple with distortions. She was beautiful in the way that supernovas were beautiful, awesome, terrible, and utterly destructive. But she was also old. Jake could see it in the way she moved, the slight hesitation in her gestures that suggested her power was no longer unlimited. 2,000 years of draining energy from captured Star Drakes had kept her alive, but it hadn't prevented the slow erosion of time. She's weakening, Jake said to himself. That's why she's been hiding for so long. She's not as strong as she used to be. The realization gave Jake an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. The Valorian ship operated using principles that bent reality to the user's will, but such power required enormous energy reserves. If Jake could find a way to disrupt the energy flow at a critical moment, he might be able to tip the balance in the Star Drake's favor. Jake activated his pod's emergency beacon and began broadcasting on every frequency he could access. This is Jake Martinez to any human vessels in the system. I need immediate assistance with a priority alpha emergency. The response came faster than he'd expected. This is Captain Torres of the cargo hauler Resilient. We're reading your beacon, but our sensors show massive energy distortions in your area. What's your situation? I need you to overload your fusion reactors and prepare for an emergency core dump, Jake said, knowing how insane the request sounded. Are you out of your mind? An uncontrolled fusion explosion would vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Jake replied. Trust me, Captain. I know what I'm doing. Jake spent the next several minutes coordinating with every human vessel in the system, explaining his plan and convincing them to participate in what amounted to a coordinated suicide mission. To his amazement, every single captain agreed to help. This is what we do, Captain Torres said simply. When the universe throws impossible odds at us, we get creative and throw them right back. As the human ships moved into position around the battling titans, Jake felt a surge of pride in his species. They might not have the raw power of Star Drakes or the reality-bending technology of Valorians, but humans had something equally valuable: the willingness to risk everything for what they believed was right. The Stardrake seemed to sense the approaching human vessels and paused in its assault on the Valorian ship. For a moment, its blazing eyes met Jake's through the pod's viewport, and Jake saw something that made his chest swell with emotion. The creature was smiling. "All right, everyone," Jake said into his communicator. "Remember, we only get one shot at this. When I give the signal, dump everything you've got directly into that crystalline ship's energy matrix." As Jake prepared to give the command that would either save the galaxy or destroy it, he couldn't help but think that his ancestors who had fought this war 2,000 years ago would be proud.